evening, everyone. Welcome to the Human-Centered Design UAE Meetup. Huge thank you to Tony, round of applause. And Aldar, our first time in Aldar. We are looking for feedback. We're always experimenting. It's good to get out of your comfort zone, so please let us know. I know I asked a few of you what you think of the venue, finding it, etc. My name's Jonathan. I am Innovation Services Lead, I think that's my title, at the Early Childhood Authority. And I'm the founder of the Meetup. Also, huge thank you to our partners, aspexx, Peter and Jack. Peter is somewhere, there's Peter. For about a year ago, we partnered with aspexx and we've really taken our Meetup to the next level. So we host regular events in Dubai and Abu Dhabi now as well for about a year now. I think we've been coming to Abu Dhabi. The Meetup started in Abu Dhabi 11 years ago, but then COVID kind of shut Abu Dhabi down. So it's good to be back. We are on the socials, both aspexx and HCD. We're recording tonight, so every past Meetup is on there as well. We've got some really great Meetups. Our last one in Abu Dhabi was arguably the best one we've ever had, so no pressure. You can watch it. It was a very lively debate. But on the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, it's also a great way to meet some of the other community. If you're new to the region, then definitely jump onto that and have a chat to Peter as well if you're looking for work or you're looking to grow your team. I've said that. It takes a lot. Unfortunately, the other co-organizers can't be here. Some are traveling. Everyone's busy, as you know, but huge thanks to Natalie, Leopold, and Nada. And Leopold just brought a book out. He's got a free 7-day course with tips. So if you're interested in a crash course in ethical persuasion, then jump on that QR code. He's an amazing coach and public speaker. He's done quite a few talks for us as well. He was part of the panel in Dubai more recently. And with a few other authors, he's co-written this book. So if you want to hear Yes more often, that's the book, that's the man. So without much further ado, I just want to introduce Chris. It's really exciting. We're very, very lucky to have Chris. I worked with Chris at Omnipresent, a fully remote startup. And we joined about the same time. It was a super exciting gig. They raised $120 million. They hired us and they said, Chris, build a product team. Jonathan, build a design, research, service design team. And we didn't have anyone. So we partnered together and we started doing some discovery ourselves. And even though we were based in different cities, whenever we had these offsites, we got a good bromance going. And I'm very lucky that I was able to bring some speakers to the Early Childhood Authority. And this morning, Chris ran a whole day workshop with the Early Childhood Authority, and we're getting our money's worth and some extra Chris, so that's why he's here. He's got a lot of product experience. He's a VP of product, and he's worked in some household names like Kraft, GE, and Moderna. Over to you, Chris.
Perfect. All right, we're gonna do something because his was on Google Slides, mine was on Canva, so try Canva for the first time. So, hi everybody, I'm Chris. Thanks for having me. If you can't hear me, do put your hand up and I'll try to speak a bit louder. So, I wanted to talk about measurable impact. So, as Jonathan said, I ran a workshop today with the Early Childhood Authority, and we talked about how to set metrics, how to frame ideas, how to test hypotheses. So I thought, well, if I'm figuring all that stuff out and teaching people that, I'll just do it again. And it was very hard with the group this morning because that's all government people, no product language at all. I had to really cater to them. So I feel like I'm back with my people now, where I can actually talk with product terminology and everyone gets it. So that's gonna be great. The agenda today, so what I want to do is I want to talk about measurable impact. Why is it important? What is it? I want to talk about customer outcomes. Again, this is an interesting one where I had to sort of preface what a customer was because they don't have customers in the ECA. I want to talk about the opportunity solution tree, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. And I want to talk about defining really effective metrics, and then we'll have some open QA. So, Jonathan had a little slide about me. I'm going to talk about me as well. So I've been doing product management for 17 plus years. I've been working in tech for over 20. I coach PMs and founders, and then I'm also a VP of product at a company called Zelix, where we do accounts payable software for really large enterprise companies, doing lots of AI and machine learning. It's really exciting stuff. This is me getting excited about stuff. Great, so measurable impact. Why is it so important? Well, I think we've seen over the last couple of years a real shift in technology. We were talking about it earlier, there's been a real downturn. Seen a lot of product people, a lot of designers, product managers going through either layoffs or struggling to find roles. And what I hear a lot is whenever I'm talking to people either in the recruitment side or in leadership side or in founders, they're all talking about how can I have more commercially minded product people, product designers, product managers. And the way I like to think of that is it's really about can you create measurable impact. And a lot of us have been this luxury of building software where there's just so much money, nobody really cares, so we can just go out and solve customer problems, have a bunch of fun doing it, and it's great. And now, when the money's tighter, as it is at the moment it has been for a number of years, people get really conscious about, okay, well, what's the actual impact you're having? And I think this is great. It's a silver lining perhaps to some really bad times for some folks. But I do think it's a really important thing because we should be thinking about what's the measurable impact that we have. And so there's two real big important areas. One is the actual business. So as I said, there's a lot of pressure on PMs, product people in general, to ensure that we're creating measurable value for the business. You can't just go off, build a bunch of features and say, look, all the stuff I've done, outputs are not good enough. You have to think about outcomes and what are you actually creating. And then also, when we think about being customer-centric, which we all should and I hope are very customer-centric in mindset, it actually means creating real value and change for our customers. So being customer-centric is not just trying to understand what their problems are, trying to be empathetic to our customers, it's trying to affect real change that helps them complete what they're trying to do and get real value from whatever product you're having. So for me, measurable impact is trying to define and understand what both of these things are and make sure you're building. And they do not have to compete with each other. I think this is another common misconception is if I'm customer-centric, well, it's the customer first, I don't really care about the business, or if the business is struggling, I gotta worry about the business and not worry about the customer as much. No, they absolutely should be hand in hand and they can be fully aligned. So I think the big challenge when it comes to measuring impact is we often just build a bunch of features and then we have a big business goal. So it might be adding a bunch of ARR or reducing churn or adding a bunch of users to our platform, and you're just building a whole bunch of features and there's just a connection of a line. And what of course happens then is there's a million other things between that. There's different user patterns, how is it demoed or sold, how is it supported, other features, how is it marketed. There's so many factors that are going on here that this, the distance between your feature and your business goal is just so huge that you don't know whether you're having impact, and you certainly can't show credibly that the work that you're doing is actually having an impact. So, the solution, introduce customer outcomes. So customer outcomes really bridge the gap between the business and the customer. And so this allows you to make sure that you're focused on the business goal, that you're actually delivering value for the business, but also that you're focused on the customer and their needs. So I've got an example here. So let's imagine that we are a online furniture store. Just go with that. And ultimately our goal is to hit 15 million annual recurring revenue. So that's the business goal. The customer outcome example is increase the average items per cart from 1.2 to 1.8. So we will have done our research. This doesn't come out of thin air. We will have done our discovery. We'll have understood that perhaps we've hit a top end when it comes to the value of items that we can sell. So there's not increasing the value of items that are getting sold is not going to happen. Maybe we're not looking at adding more users to the platform because that's very much a marketing driven thing when you think about a marketplace. And so we've discovered that the biggest impact that we can have to that business goal is actually increasing the average items in the cart from 1.2 to 1.8. And this is really specifically important here, is that this customer outcome is a measurable change in customer behavior. So that's the definition I want to use for a customer outcome. It's a measurable change in customer behavior. And so the behavior that we're trying to change is we're trying to get them to add more items to the cart, and we're trying to do that from 1.2 to 1.8. So there's very clear numbers, it's very clear what we're trying to achieve. Now, of course, no customer is sitting there going, I want to add more items to my cart. That's not what the customer's need is. And that's where we need to explore what are the opportunities, what are the pain points, the jobs to be done, the challenges that the customer is facing that will ultimately lead them to changing to this behavior. So this is where the behavior is representing of the customer, but it's not necessarily the customer's need, and it bridges the gap between the two things. So if we then introduce the opportunity solution tree, what we're doing is we're introducing this opportunity here, where a lot of them. So you can imagine, as you start to do your discovery and you start to understand from this lens of this customer outcome that we want to get people adding more items to the cart. This is the thing that's going to drive the business forward. Now I need to understand what are the problems, what are the challenges that customers are facing. And so we'll go through and do our discovery, talk to customers, understand the data, look at the patterns of how they're using our platform, and ultimately map out all of the opportunities. And so an opportunity is a pain point, a customer need, it could be a job to be done, any of those definitions, however you want to define it, that's all sort of captured in this opportunity. And so you map out all of the opportunities that are driving towards this outcome. And so what I'll do with my teams as a product leader is I'll work with them to understand what are those outcomes. I'll work with other business leaders or other leaders within the business, and we'll define that outcome. And then that gives them a clear guardrails of where they want to go and do their discovery. And so often when we're talking to customers, there's just so many different things that are all over the place. We could build 1,000 features, but what we want to do is have some guardrails around what are we going to do that's actually going to create value for the business and move us forward. And so this customer outcome gives some guardrails for those teams to explore. So the opportunity, you map out all of your opportunities and then you tie that to the feature, to the idea. So if we go back to the example, so we've got our 50 million ARR that we're trying to hit, and then we want to increase the average items per cart. And so what we've found in our discovery is that customers need to furnish an entire room. So that's an opportunity that is clearly connected to this items per cart. If customers are coming to our site and they want to furnish an entire room, then this is a problem that they have, or job to be done that they're trying to do. And then another thing that we've identified is they don't know what goes together. Now this is obviously a slide of just a simple example. You can imagine when you've done discovery, there might be hundreds of these, and that's where you need to do some prioritization. You need to figure out which are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact, which are the ones that are the biggest problems to customer. So you'll want to do some prioritization, but in this example, we'll just take these two. And so then our idea that comes out of this is building a room builder feature where the customer can come on and say, this is what I want to do, these are all the pieces I need, and then they can see how those things go together, and ultimately we'll solve both problems. And so you'll often see that where an idea will solve multiple opportunities. And then you'll want to do good testing of this opportunity and try to understand, hey, will this actually work? Will customers use it? Go through some usability testing, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately then you can now see. Now, the other big thing that happens here, I think the next slide's gonna show it, yeah. This is where you can actually start to really track metrics in a much more efficient way, because now you can track individual metrics on this. I've just made up some numbers here. So we could be looking at how many clicks this room builder has. We could be tracking the usage of it. We could be tracking other patterns. So there could be a multitude of metrics in here that are giving us some early signs of how this is getting used. Those metrics could be used for iteration, or we could be using those to define and see if there's success. We can also track and understand these opportunities and start to build metrics around there that says, now 38% of people are purchasing multiple items together. So it might be a good metric to be able to track there. And then we might see that 47 people in average per day or whatever are actually furnishing their entire room using this. So we can start to create almost a cascading set of metrics that show us how we're having impact along the way, so that when we have 20 other opportunities that we're building 20 other features for, we're able to say what's actually having the biggest impact here to this overall thing. And then this here, this metric, we'll be able to see that going up. And then along with this, we'll be able to actually say what percentage of, because we've gone from, in this case, 1.2 to 1.6, we'll be able to say how much has that actually had in terms of a business value. So you can see we can create this amazing story now that brings credibility and understanding to the features that we've built, so that we're able to sit there in front of our teams, in front of our leaders, and clearly define what's working and what's not. And the what's not working is just as important as what is working. Because if this room builder feature isn't getting used, isn't adding value, it's just adding bloat in our platform. And so we want to remove that. And if you don't measure it, you can't understand it. And so this is a great example of how we can actually measure all of those things.
Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to pause now for questions. Yes? Yes? Yeah.
So, do you bring Tam and Sam into this part of the conversation?
It depends. So, in what context? Let me ask you that before.
So you probably have a total addressable market and then a serviceable addressable market. So do you, in your calculations here, do you sort of go back to, well, the service addressable market, here's our slice, this is what we're trying to do to increase to get to?
Yeah, I think like defining, I didn't go into great detail of how you get to this. Like this is a complex process. So let me spend a bit more time on this. I think you're absolutely right. Understanding your TAM and your SAM for this is really key. There's also understanding like what is the business trying to do? What are the biggest challenges? So this is very much strategy. And so I'm a big Richard Rumlett fan, so I really think that it's about identifying what are the biggest obstacles that you have as a business. So if we want to hit 15 million ARR, first of all, I have to understand what's preventing us from getting there. What are the biggest obstacles? What are the biggest opportunities? And really define that sort of that path to getting to 15 million. And so as part of that, yes, I'll look at my total addressable market, I'll look at my serviceable market, I'll look at my current customers, I'll look at where my problems are. If I'm really suffering from a lot of churn, and we are adding lots of business, but we're bleeding our ARR through churn, then I'm going to have a very different strategy to this. So I think it really just depends on what are the obstacles at the business level of achieving that. And from there, then I can start to go, okay, how am I going to affect this with the product? Does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
On your next slide, just wondering how you limit or where you stop adding opportunities to the tree, because otherwise you end up with like a feature that's just never ending.
Yeah. So opportunity solution tree, if anybody's familiar with this, comes from Teresa Torres, and she wrote a book called Continuous Discovery Habits. And so it is continuous, right? And you want to keep building it. What I find happens in the reality of building software is that you end up getting a core set of opportunities fairly quickly. So if you haven't done this, if you haven't really started to understand what are your customers' needs and problems, etc., you get a core amount very quickly, and then it just constantly keeps getting added to. And so what you want to do is you want to prioritize, and then what I tell my teams is we have a best current answer as to what we want to build and the problems that we want to solve. And so if you take and I absolutely love Teresa Torres' book, The Continuous Discovery Habits, but the reality is I can't have PMs every day going, oh, there's a new one, there's a new one, there's a new one. You have to at some point commit to it. And this is not about building waterfall software, like we're using Carpaccio, so we're releasing every single day. Every engineer has a slice of work, and features are getting out almost daily, it's insane. But you have to sort of have a plan and stick to it, but keep looking at what other opportunities are out there. So every month to 2 months, we'll take any new opportunities that have come out, and they'll come from customer feedback that's coming directly from customers, it'll come from data that we have, it'll come from our interviews. We take all of that, we put it all into Dovetail. Thanks, Jonathan, for introducing me to Dovetail many years ago. And everything goes into Dovetail, and once a month, ad blocker has updated and got rather aggressive there. Sorry, folks. But it's exactly what your question sort of alluding to. If you just keep adding them and never actually work on anything. So I'm keeping an eye on it, and then once a month or so we put that into a spreadsheet and run through a prioritization, unless there is something so blindingly obvious that we want to change course.
Would there be a hypothesis attached to each opportunity to say kind of how big we expect it to be and how many more we can fit into this release?
Yeah, it's ironic because one of the things I taught today was a hypothesis framework for running experimentation. So again, when you talk to opportunity solution tree and the way Teresa Torres talks about it, she's talking about experimentation on the idea, right? So I put feature here, but typically you talk about it as an idea, you run experimentation on that idea, and then that can turn into your solution. I actually like what you just said, which is running experimentation even on the opportunity itself and trying to understand what's the impact here. Some opportunities will be blindingly obvious as to what the impact will be. And again, you have to understand, how are you measuring impact? I'm not a fan of RICE. So if everybody's familiar with RICE, reach, impact, confidence, and effort, my concern with that is that impact is different for different features. So if you're, let's say you're prioritizing features, or you're prioritizing opportunities, or even if you're prioritizing customer outcomes, impact is different. And so what I do is typically break impact out into a bunch of different things. So how much is this going to help us sell the product? How much is this going to reduce churn? How much is this going to impact our customers' usage of the platform? And I try to break that out into more objective measurements so that I get a much more objective, even if those are subjective in themselves, I'll end up with a more objective overall prioritization. But yeah, we'll go through, we'll prioritize anywhere where we can experiment, anywhere where there's a lack of confidence. We'll figure out how we can get more confident that this is the most important thing to work on, because you can't work on everything.
Could you talk about how you could use this to bridge gaps with marketing? For example, if your research opportunities actually is that the products are great, but they're sold poorly, have you used this model to like tell them what they should focus on?
It's a really great point, because what I find comes out of this when we think about an outcome. So if let's take that the carts one. Where's this carts? Am I going to be able to make that work? Now I'm nervous that I'm going to jump into this and it's not going to work. But if we say that there is a big element of that carts thing, which is a marketing problem, what we'll find is, in talking to our customers, we'll identify a whole bunch of opportunities that are actually in marketing, or could be in sales. Like we went through and did this where one of the big opportunities that came out of it was our customers were coming into our platform not understanding a key element of what it actually should do. And so this became an opportunity where we could actually go back to our sales team and our implementation team and train them better on this thing. And so you'll get all sorts of opportunities coming out of it that aren't necessarily just software. And again, when you've built out this tree and you can show how these connect to our ultimate goal, that conversation with marketing then becomes a lot easier. Because you can say, hey, here's the behavior we're trying to change, which is something that for a marketing team is easier to understand than most of the product speak that they're given. If you say,
feel that they get threatened sometimes, like you move their cheese?
Yeah.
You know more about the customer than they do?
Yeah, and look, this is a classic thing of like, who owns the customer? Is it design? Is it customer success? Well, they have it in their name, as I was told once by a customer success person. We literally talk about customer success. We own the customer. And so I think that is, again, a relationship building thing. You've got to build a relationship with your marketing teams, your customer success teams, design, product. Everybody needs to work together and understand that nobody owns the customer owns these teams, and we're here to service them. And so I think it's a balance. But again, if you find opportunities that can be solved by marketing, I think this is a better way to communicate that than running to marketing saying, hey, you're doing it wrong. Yeah.
Maybe a follow-up, but from a different angle. How do you explain the measurement on the business goal? So let's say, you said you need to go to 15 million ARR. So if let's say that the product team is measured according to it, some of the product manager might say, yeah, I understand the business goal. However, one thing I can do is get to the customer outcome, but it will not necessarily mean that we'll get to 50 million, because maybe marketing, maybe sales will do it. So in a sense, I was struggling in the past to explain to the two teams, saying, yeah, it's important you will measure according to it, while you might not be able to affect it 100%. I think this is the gap, and I was wondering, what are your strategy when explaining it to the team?
And so this is where I measure the performance of my teams to this point, not to this point.
Okay.
And that's one of the big differences, is now I can actually, so I worked in HR tech for a while, and we talk about performance management as being the triangulation of opinion, which is that manager review, which is often all performance management or performance reviews is just the opinion of your manager or your peers. correlated with your results and then with your competency. And so if you have a good competency framework and you're measuring that in the most objective way you can, then you take that combined with your results and the opinion, and that becomes your performance review. And the big problem has always been, when I've gone to that, is with something like sales, the results is very easy to quantify, right? Like, you know, you have a target, did you hit it, did you not? And so when it comes to like a business goal, there's not enough agency there to say to a PM, we have to hit 15 million, because if the sales team, the marketing team, the partnership team, whatever lets you down, then, you know, it's not your fault. But if we have agency, and we're going to talk about how we find the effective metrics and find effective versions of this, but you have to have agency. You've got to be able to say, this is something we can change. It's an interesting one because it gets hard. So we released a new product in June, and I spent a lot of time thinking, like, the ideal customer, to give you a bit of context. So the product is what we call Help Desk. So this is basically a ticketing system for accounts payable that leverages a lot of AI to automate a lot of the stuff that they do. So in our customers, they get, you know, 15,000, 20,000 emails a month just asking, where's my invoice? And so it's a very repetitive task, easy to automate, easy to figure out. So we built this product to do it. We released it in June. Now, how you would typically measure a customer outcome in that kind of a new that kind of a product is you'd say, well, let's reduce the time it takes to respond to requests. Very obvious. That's success. That's the behavior that we're trying to get the customer to. We can measure it. We have agency on that. But a brand new product to market, you just haven't got a lot of customers. And that, as a business, our goal, maybe not our 15 million ARR, but our goal was a certain amount of expansion and a certain amount of new sales in this new product. So what I did is turn around to my PM who ran that, and I said, look, we're gonna have one that isn't as much agency for you. We're gonna say we want X number of new users on the platform. Now, you don't have as much agency. If the sales team fail you, you know, you're gonna miss this goal. And I'm okay with that. We're gonna take a bit of a risk. But what it's gonna force you to do is think about what are the opportunities, coming back to your question earlier, that we can actually empower the sales team. So he built really good demo data. Worked side by side with our head of sales to come up with a really good demo script that helps them sell that product. He prioritized features that would help sell the product over necessarily making the product more efficient for existing customers. So that frame of reference was still super important for him. He probably wouldn't have invested the time that he did in building the demo data had that not been the outcome. But it was one where his agency wasn't complete there. It was, you know, dependent on other things. So you want to go into it with eyes wide open. It's not a perfect, like any of these things you read in the books, we read in Marty Kagan, Teresa Torres, any of these, it sounds great in the book, but the reality of life starts to interject. But this is, you know, I've done this across now 4 different companies, and this system really does work, but there is nuances.
Yeah, so this business impact is very like top line centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
How important it is to understand the bottom line impact as well for product managers. For example, they're building a feature and they should know how it will drive profitability or margins for the business, right? Especially for the startups that are on a tight runway room.
Yeah. So again, I would say that, like, I'm talking top line in the example, but that could be a margin goal, right? Like if we need to tighten up our margins and we need to increase profitability, you could have that as a business goal. You also have several business goals. Again, this is sort of simplified down, but you can often have several goals, and then you go, actually, this customer outcome will affect multiple goals. Does that answer your question, or no?
Yeah, it answers. Or maybe sometimes we have to compromise on the customer outcome as well. So we balance between the margin and the customer outcome.
Can you repeat that? I'm not sure. I want to make sure I answer.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like, for the startups that are on very tight runway room,
yeah,
they have to balance between the customer outcome and the margin. They have to make sure that the feature that we're building, it drives customer outcome, but it drives profitability as well.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, I think the going back to what I was originally talking about here is that if we're building these things and we're only thinking about that profitability and we're not thinking about our customer, we have this huge gap. And the intention is that this should bridge it. So when you're thinking about, okay, we've got tight margins, we've got small runway, we need to make sure, what are we doing to make sure we hit this, but also what's important for the customer and how do we bridge those two things. Again, not always will these really line up, but if you really put some effort behind, and this is like this is an effort of sitting down. This is strategic work, right? Is sitting down and figuring out, how do I actually balance this? What is the biggest obstacle that we have to overcome? How are we going to overcome that? Is that?
Yep.
How much would you say this is tied to, like you mentioned your deployment cycle, you're releasing stuff every day, so it seems like when things are, like problems and measurables and solutions are much more isolated on a kind of like daily basis, it seems a little bit easier for those things to link up and be measured. But let's say we're bound by like much more rigid deployment structures, we're probably dealing with multiple goals, multiple features, multiple outcomes, multiple measurements, and then the combination of all those features kind of like, you know, like crisscrossing and impacting multiple, especially when you're talking about something like e-commerce.
Yeah.
When it's like changing one aspect of customer behavior will have this, but what about like the compound interest of multiple different things? Doesn't it kind of just completely muddy the water if we can only release, say, once every month or 2 months, or if this is, you know, big project releases? How much does it have to be linked to the speed in which we can deploy it?
Yeah. I really should have, because this happened this morning too. I wish I had a Miro board that I could just flash up to show some of the big ones that I've built before. The ones I have now are all pretty simple. But no, these can get really gnarly, and I think again, it's this idea of, you know, if you have multiple business goals and you have multiple outcomes, and then what you're describing, which is there's a lot of opportunities, we're releasing on longer scales, so there's lots of features going out. When you map these things out, and I do recommend Miro for this because there's enough space for everything to go, and thank God they finally got collapsible tree mind maps in there. And so you just have really big gnarly things, and then you have, you know, whatever tools you're using, but I just go back to spreadsheets where all of these features have the metrics that they're in, and that's linking to the reports, and we can come back and see those things, and then start to add up and say, okay, look, you know, if 3 customer outcomes are all trying to move this goal, and I'm able to measure, you know, again, if I'm going back to, this one here, if I'm able to quantify how much revenue that's creating, then I can create a spreadsheet that has those things. So it can get really gnarly and really big, but I prefer to map it out and then track it than what I've previously done, which has gone, man, these seem like the right features, we've released them, we either hit our 50 million or we didn't, and then it really becomes the opinion of that leadership as to whether or not you've been successful. Because they may look at it and go, we hit 15 million, but we did it despite the product. We did it because we got an amazing sales team and everything else. Or they may look at that and go, we did this because we've got an amazing product. Or we may miss that goal, and they may understand that actually we've got a really good product, other parts of the business are broken. But if you can't show the measurable impact, you're just at the whim of that leadership team to decide whether they like you or not. And Jonathan's nodding furiously because we've had that experience. Great. Other questions? Yes?
Just one comment regarding the customer outcome. How do you make sure that the selected customer outcome doesn't have a negative impact on the customer? So like who's deciding that and who's selecting? Because like some business people might, you know, they might see certain customer outcomes very simple and what they know, but then, you know, designers might have, you know, they would choose a different one. How do you balance that?
It's a great question. So again, coming back to like how we get to these, I do see it as my responsibility to define those outcomes for my team. But if I hand those as a, you know, stone tablets and say, this is what you're doing, go off and do it, I'll fail my teams. And so I think it's a bottom up and top down approach to it, where I'm talking to my teams about what are we hearing about our customers? What are some of the big things? So again, if we take this example, I may have data that my teams are showing me, or you know, research that they're showing me that's saying, look, we're not able to, you know, sell more expensive products. We're topped out on that. The data is showing us that this is just not going to work. And then I've got, you know, business leaders saying, look, if we could just get more items sold. So I'm looking at it from both angles, and I'm trying to bring that information that my teams have, because they're closer to the customer, they've got more information. And so I'm using that to help inform that, but I'm also then looking at what the business needs and information that they necessarily don't have access to or aren't as familiar with, to help drive this decision. And then I'm putting it in place. Obviously, I'm vetting it with the team. I'm talking to the team saying, look, this is the direction we're going to go. We think that this is the best thing, and get feedback from them saying, well, what about If we, I'm trying to think of another e-commerce example, can't think of it, but what about X? And then I'm considering that as part of the feedback. And ultimately, when I arrive to this, everybody should feel very comfortable and confident. Because this is, typically these outcomes are anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Because it takes time to affect change. There's gonna be lots of opportunities. I don't see customer outcomes going through these like every 3 months or so. And then you have to be open to new information. And so you may go through this and find out actually this is not working, or this is not driving the revenue we thought it would, or something else has changed in the environment, whether again, that's learning from our designers about how customer behavior is going, or whether it's learning from the business. Does that help a little bit? I think there was a question back there.
Yeah, I think it was the same question, but just a different angle again. I just wanted to ask that how do you measure when say you start to realize that an opportunity in the beginning now is turning into a threat? Say from the customer, it is benefiting the customers, the opportunity is benefiting them. But from the business angle, it's more like a threat because maybe, as somebody said, it's not generating revenue. So how do you balance that out? Or do you completely remove that opportunity, but that will hamper the customer impact, and they might feel that, you know, there's a lot of change happening, or they might switch to some other product or some other services. So how do you, at that point, retain the customer?
Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna take this from two angles. So first, from like when you create this, you've got to have that alignment with what the business needs are. I'll give you a really concrete example of this. I worked for a company called 15Five. This is HR software. When the pandemic hit, you know, our business leaders and our product leaders were very worried about our line item was going to be one of the first things you can drop. It's like, okay, I don't need one-on-one software, I don't need performance management software, I'm just looking for everything that I can cut. And so we're very scared of losing that. And so what our CEO and a number of other people said is, let's go to a freemium model. So during the pandemic, as we go into these lockdowns, let's get as many people on the platform as possible. So we come out the other side of this, we'll have a bunch of people who are really satisfied, enjoying the platform, getting a lot of value from it, and then we can start to move them onto paid features. And so this was a great idea. I see lots of nodding, people go, that seems to make sense. And so if we had that as an outcome, we didn't actually use this system back then, but had we had that as an outcome and we had a really clear measurable goal about getting people onto this freemium model, and we looked at all the opportunities and mapped that all out, what we would have very quickly found, and what we found in reality, is this was cannibalizing our sales business, because all of these people were coming to our site and we still had sales goals, and those sales teams still had goals, and so we were taking the traffic that was coming to the site and we were moving them to freemium. And so they were pissed in their language because all of their leads were now going into this freemium, and they needed those leads to be able to have any hope of hitting their goals, because we were going into this depressed market. And so it is, had we done this, I would argue that we would have sat down and really talked to our sales leaders and said, hey, this is what we're gonna do, and here's our plan to get there. And they would have gone, hang on a second, what happens to the site traffic if you're saying that one of the opportunities is to drive site traffic towards the freemium sign up? But because we didn't talk it through, we didn't map it out, there wasn't that awareness, and so we went off and did it, and then all of a sudden we had a bunch of problems. So that's the first thing is, I would say, once you actually map these things out and really, put them through with a lot of other people and explain what you're doing, and it's language that people can often get, especially when you've got it like an opportunity to describe in a very English sort of sentence or whatever language you're using, but in a sentence that people can understand, as opposed to, a one-line item in a spreadsheet or something like that. When you're using language people can understand, they start to see the things that scare them or that would worry them. So that's one angle. I'd say the other thing is you're not always going to cover all of those bases, and you're going to find, and I think this is again where this is, I love this came from our previous boss, which is, this is our current best answer. And I love that sentiment, and I encourage everybody to use that whenever you're saying, here's the right answer, here's our current best answer. Because that gives you the room to go, you know what, we may learn from this that actually this is wrong, and that's okay then. And I use that all the time with my teams, and I see my teams now using that as well. And it's really powerful language because it gives you the freedom to say I was wrong, because that was my current best answer. I have new information now, I'm able to change my perspective. And so I think you're always gonna run into things. And so have that mentality of, I need to be able to shift and change. Great. Yeah?
Sorry, one more question.
No, I love the questions, because I have not got a ton of slides, so this is great.
Big fan of trees for us. I'm actually using it to apply to navigate around. I want AI in my product.
Yes. Great way
So,
to get by the
I've-
silly ideas.
Yeah, well, so I actually take it right down to data as a product.
Mm-hmm.
So what's my minimum viable data set
Yeah.
that releases value on my customers? And then I go, well, do I need AI? Do I not need AI? But I'm interested, like, how are you using this to navigate? But I just want AI in my product.
Yeah. Well, ironically, this is an AI first company. We have a proper data science team. Everything is genuinely we're doing it right in the company I work for. But what I didn't talk about is, if we go to a slide that has more of this, what I find about this, and I talked about this morning, is often it actually starts here. If we ignore the word feature and we say an idea, it often starts here. And what I love about this is, for many years it was always, no, don't come to me with solutions, come to me with problems. And I hated that, because you're asking all these people who don't think in problems, they think in solutions, to try and change their thinking to suit you. So it's one of my absolute red flags with any PM or designer that's like, nope, don't talk to me unless you come to me with a problem. I'm like, no, people don't talk in problems, they talk in solutions. So what you have to do is you have to have a framework that helps them get back to the actual problem or the opportunity, and then back to the outcome and everything else. So when somebody comes to me, and you're doing the exact right thing here, is if I've got this customer behavior that I'm trying to change that aligns to a business goal, and I'm sitting with a CEO and we're saying, look, we want to get to, let's go back to the example one, we're trying to get to 15 million ARR. We all agree that if we can increase the average cart size, your idea of adding AI, not gonna help here. It doesn't solve any opportunity. Look at all these opportunities. You agree, if we could get them to furnish a room, or if we could get them to understand what goes together, you agree that would happen there. Once they actually plot this themselves, they start to go, oh yeah, I guess. And that will work for a week, and then they come back into your office a week later and say, yeah, AI.
I read this article, look at all these competitors.
But then you can just bring this up again, and you can, and so, but it is a really helpful communication tool to help them map it in their own mind of actually, what problem am I solving? Instead of going back to them and saying, well, wait, what value does it have? You're asking them to do all the work. Here, you can give them a framework where they can do the work themselves, and you can help them through that. So it's great for getting rid of those magpies going for the shiny object. Because today it's AI, tomorrow it'll be something else. Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna double up again. An idea, have you ever used this for people management? In the sense that instead of feature, you have someone on your team, and then there's the business outcome, which is that we all have to get better at our jobs, or we have to ship more features. Ever use this model to actually run the department?
No, I haven't. I will say I've tried to use it with my wife on our renovations in the house.
How did that go?
No, not very well at all. In fact, if I bring anything home from work and she can just tell, she's like, no, you're not going to product this. Just be a normal human being. No, I haven't, but I do think that, and if you were to talk to Teresa Torres, I think she would agree, this is just a great way of mapping out a mental model, right? And really what she's done is she's built a really clear categorization for mind mapping. Because this is all we're doing, is we're trying to map out how do we get to 15 million, but by giving it some categorization and giving that some definition, we're able to do it in a much more effective way.
Because I think what I like about the purple level for people management is that if you think that you have a certain outcome that you want your team member to do, this frees you the opportunity tree to actually consider lots of options.
Yeah.
Like you could go on a course, right? You get to a team where you can do something like that. Normally, as a leader, you're like, I know exactly what's right for you.
Yeah.
I'm the solutions person.
Yeah.
But this kind of frees you up to say, hey, why don't we consider all the stuff and see what best meets the outcome for you that then makes the department successful.
Yeah, and I think if you took it an individual and you're managing an individual, if you said you come to me and your goal is to become a principal designer, great. Well, what are the behavior changes? And that's your competency framework. If you're able to have a good competency framework that outlines all of the behaviors that a principal product manager or principal designer would have, then you're able to start looking at what are the opportunities, where are the needs, where do you need to grow in order to get to that behavior, and then these become not features but actions that you're going to take. So absolutely, I think that model really
You got
works.
a whole other book idea, mate, right
Yeah, there we go. I'll write continuous performance discovery. There we go. And I'll put a forward with your name. No royalties, just a forward. Great. So the second thing, how are we doing on time?
Right.
Plenty of time? Is everyone all right? Falling asleep? Good. All right. So the second thing that I wanted to sort of talk about is how do we define effective metrics? So here we can show how we can have a bunch of different metrics that exist, and also we've talked about this as being a measurable change in behavior. So what I always find is that people struggle with this. It's very easy to come up with the wrong metrics. It's very easy to come up with vanity metrics. And there's often people like the session we did this morning, we had a little Slido and said, what are the challenges? Number one challenge is there's no data. And so I always say that there's no data because you didn't think about it up front. Like if you're trying to measure something after the fact, yeah, it's going to be hard. But if you think about how you define it up front, you'll be able to make that data available. So this is a series of questions that I think help you find and define really effective metrics. So I really recommend, and I'll share these slides out afterwards, but I really recommend that when you're trying to define a metric that you're asking yourself these questions. So the first one is when do customers take an action or reach a result? So again, when we talk about that behavior, so adding an item to a cart is reaching a result. It's taking that action. That's something that I can measure, rather than just saying, the only result is buying an item. Well, I'll get a lot of lagging metrics if I only focus on when they've bought something. I want to get to an earlier part. I may think even more about when they've viewed a product as being an end result. So you're trying to think about what are they doing, because that's going to get you to that behavior. Does this apply to the majority of our customers? So this is again the reach kind of thing. As I said earlier, I'm not a big fan of the rice model, and I find reach becomes sort of a watered down thing. But it is important as you're talking about thinking about a metric is, does this apply to the majority of my customers? And I think there's a lot more nuance in here. Is it your key customers? Is it the customer segmentation that matters in this moment? So if our business goal is churn, does this apply to our customers who are likely to churn? So there's a lot of nuance that goes into that, but you want to think about how does this apply to the majority of our customers? Is this moment or behavior measurable? So this is where, do we have access to the data comes in, is can we measure this? And so if you're thinking about these things up front, often the answer is yes, but we have to build something to make it measurable. And so when you think about these things up front as you're designing out your opportunity solution tree, before you've even touched any code, before you've even designed anything, you're starting to think about how do we define success here. What's the frequency? So again, if this is happening daily or weekly or monthly, if it's happening yearly, just no, don't do that. That's way too long to be able to, some people may be stuck in that model, but you want to be trying to find those things that are happening much more frequently, because that will allow you to be able to see the change. If your frequency is once a year that's happening, then it's going to be very hard for you to measure it. And this comes back, we were talking about agency earlier. What external factors can impact this? And I'm using behavior here, but you can interject that with any metric that you're using, even if you're not measuring behavior. It's just what other external factors could impact that. And so again, we were talking before, if we're talking about a 15 million ARR, there's many different external factors. How are our sales teams doing? How are our marketing teams doing? So this really tries to force down what's the agency that's happening here. Even at a feature level, is there other external factors that could affect the measurement of this? And you might just have a vanity metric then, because it's just, depends on how many users are in there in a day. Well, that's not a good way of measuring it if we're trying to measure the effectiveness. And does this indicate change for its parent? So again, coming back to that tree, does this actually show us change? This is a big one for getting away from the vanity metrics. Is this actually showing us a change? So, am I going to be able to click it quick enough? Yeah. So, if I'm looking at this metric, and there is some usage metrics that I might be interested in, that'll help me iterate and learn how I can make this room builder better. But when I'm defining success for this, it needs to be actually affecting some of these parents. If it's not as a vanity metric, then that's obviously not going to help us. So those are our questions. I think the next one, yeah, okay. So I'll leave these up, but any questions on the questions?
So one of the things that comes up for me at the moment is sustainability, especially in the AI space. So if I roll this feature out, and this feature does this, it's going to churn more data, it's going to drive my computer.
Yeah.
Then I've got to hit an ESG target. I've also got to show low carbon. Later on, I could get fined. Do you get to those conversations at the moment?
We do, yeah. We've got whole spreadsheets that track everything and start to try and figure out like what's going to be our spend on this, what's going to be ethics to all of it goes into like ours is a nice space because it's accounts payable. Like, the data that you're analyzing is invoices and POs and payments and things like that. So ethics and biases and all of that are not necessarily our problem. It was a big decision factor in me joining this company. I was like, I don't want to have to debate people on ethics all the time. This is a big important thing for me. And so, yeah. But I do think like this is a set of questions that work really well for me. I think find your set of questions that you're going to be able to apply to this to either define a metric or to make sure that this is the right thing. Does that?
Yeah, that does. Thanks.
Is there maybe one like missing maybe?
Oh, definitely. There's lots missing.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah. But I'm thinking that something along the lines of how not always what we think we're measuring reflects what we think we're trying to achieve as a behavioral trait. So like just 10 years ago, everybody says like you're building websites, just reduce my bounce rate. But actually, the bounce rate sometimes doesn't reflect what you think that people are using your website because they hate your website. Sometimes they just came to answer a question, they got the answer to that question, and they left.
Yeah.
Does the measure actually reflect what the business is trying to?
I love that, and that's definitely missing from this list, and I'm going to pop it on there the next time I do this, because you're absolutely right, and I was kind of alluding to it with this, and this will often capture that. Because if we take your bounce rate example, if we're trying to get people, so let's say our customer outcome is that customers are getting their answers faster on our website. The bounce rate is not necessarily going to be a metric that shows success or failure in that case. And so what I'm trying to do with this one is say, is it actually impacting the parent? The bounce rate, you could, when you start to analyze that, you go, no, that's not going to affect this or not. But you're right, I think a better version or an additional version to this is this actually going to create the measurable change that we're looking for? Yeah. One of the things I'll say about this, and when I talk to my teams, and I really say like, this is something to do with your trio. This is not something that a PM should just sit down there and define all of the metrics. Whether you're working with a trio or it's other PMs, like I'm a big fan of pair programming. I think there's some paired product work that goes on. This is by far and away the most important one to pair on. Because one person sitting there trying to think, is this the right metric, is a terrible exercise.
What's
when
the
you
trio, Chris?
Trio, yeah. So the trio is your product designer, product manager, and your tech lead. You can have any variations of that. I've got lots where there's a researcher in there as well. Data science is often in there, so you might not be a trio. It might be, we had quads at a company I worked at because we had data science on every team. But it's whatever group is sort of working together, but just making sure, and whether it's that or whether it's having multiple PMs or multiple designers sitting down, what you're trying to get to is multiple people talking about this and answering these questions. And this, like, these aren't the perfect questions, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to think more critically about that metric. So you're not just sitting there going, oh yeah, great, we're gonna track how many users bounce. And if that goes up or goes down, we'll have success or failure. That's not going to help you. It's really about trying to dive deeper into it.
Yeah, so I come from tech background, not
Yep.
so much a product background. How do you explain this decision, or how much of this do you explain to the tech team about the decision making and the measurements and the metrics and all of this?
None of it. I just tell them what I want them to build. If they don't do it, they're all fired. No, I think it's a great question. And I was thinking earlier when I was answering somebody else's question, I was like, oh, I got to remind people that this is incredibly powerful for the engineers. All of this stuff is incredibly powerful. If we go back to this one here, like I ask my PMs, I ask my PMs to regularly share these metrics with their tech teams, because I'm a strong believer in, and also like what our outcome is. right? And how we define success. Because we were going through this, because this is one of the areas I'm trying to work on with my PMs, is we're defining success too late, too often. And I want to define success before we even start designing something, because if your tech team, and now you include designers, research, engineers, data science, BAs, whatever you have, if that group understands what success looks like, they'll make different choices. And this is, again, being outcome focused versus output focused. If I say all we need to do is build a room builder, they'll build a room builder. But if I say our success on this is that we solve these problems and we ultimately increase the average cart rate, they'll think about that solution differently. Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for
No, just
giving me the opportunity to say
I've just
that.
had it before where it's big silos.
Yeah.
And sometimes they refuse to explain it. Just trust me, bro. It's
Yeah.
fine, don't worry about it. Just do it. Trust me.
I'd never
And
trust
it's-
anybody who says, just trust me, Bo. Doesn't matter what it is. If my doctor walks in and says, just trust me, Bo, I'm going for it. Yeah, so it's a great question. We had another one back.
Can you go back to the questions?
Yes.
So the third question is, if the behavior is measurable, what if the behavior is not measurable?
Then you're probably working with the wrong metric. And so the idea of this is some of these questions are just reflective to try and think a bit deeper and help you choose. But if you have identified something that really isn't measurable, like,
We don't
oh,
have data.
yeah, trying to think of a good example here now. If customers are happy with what's in their cart, right? Like that's the outcome we're trying to get to, is we want to increase the happiness that people are with their cart, because then they'll actually hit, pay at the end of it. Well, that's not a measurable thing. I can't measure that. So I'm gone down the wrong route. I should really make this the first question, because then it just saves a bunch of time. But yeah, it's really trying to make sure that we're thinking about, and when I say measurable, I mean like, can we actually capture the data around this? So this comes back to that classic one of the biggest challenge on all of this stuff is I don't have the data. Well, if you can't measure it, and it might just be, because is this moment measurable is not just a hypothetically measurable, but is it measurable by our team? Do we have the functions to be able to measure this, collect the data, so that we can then define, see if we're succeeding? So it might just be that my data team goes, no, sorry, I can't, we don't have the plugins, or I don't have the time to build that measurement in. Is that?
With the question what external factors can impact this behaviour, do you mean things that are outside of the digital footprint?
It could be within the digital footprint too.
Okay.
Like it could be, again, like, the idea of the bounce rate, like an external factor to that is that they've got their answer. And so that's not to say that I've done it wrong. And so I'm looking at any types of external factors. And this tends to be the one we spend the most time on, because we actually start thinking about what are all the external factors that would change this metric.
And in that case, would you resort to like gathering qualitative data possible about that, or because it's very difficult to get from quant data? Like I come from a learning design background, and obviously trying to often work out, if we see that students spent a long time on a certain page, does it mean they read through it? Does it mean they went off and watched Netflix? Does it mean they fell asleep? So we run focus groups and try and, or anonymous surveys and try and get to the bottom of the stats that we're actually seeing.
So in an ideal world, we define success by a quantifiable measurement that we can have access to on a regular basis and has a high frequency, so it's changing a lot, so we're learning and we're defining success that way. Reality is often that we can't do that, and so you find your best answer that you can to that. And so let's take that example, right? So if we say that our outcome is that the students are reading through this material, and it becomes a question of, well, we can't really measure that, because just saying that they spent time on the page does not necessarily help us, and we don't want to put eye trackers on all of the computers just yet. You rely on the quantifiable then, or the qualitative, and you just have to then take that qualitative and enough to be able to turn around and say, and so if your definition of success is 7 out of 10 or 70% of the students that we interviewed say they have read through that material, then that becomes your success metric. But I always try to take the qualitative and turn that into a quantitative, so I still have some number there. And so I'll take that and say, okay, I'm gonna have to talk to people. I'm gonna learn a lot from that, and you obviously, relying purely on quantitative data is a bad idea as well, because you'll make lots of mistakes. It's just natural. Even if you've gone through this and you pick the best metrics, you've got to be talking to people. You've got to understand that qualitative level as well. And so, yeah, if I can't have a quantitative one, I'll take the qualitative and I'll try to quantify it as much as possible. Hope everybody followed that, because I kind of lost myself there in the middle of some tracks. Any other questions? I have to say, this, no offense to your group at the EEC, this was way more fun to talk to product people and answer all of your questions. Love the EECA. No, this is great. I really appreciate all the questions. I really didn't have enough slides to fill a long amount of time. I was hoping and expecting lots of good questions, and I really appreciate that. So I now have a slide that's completely useless. Is there any questions? And I had this because I was like, well, if there's no questions, I'll start with one. But I'll still ask this, like, what would you change in your current approach? So having gone through this, is there anything that you're sitting there going, I'm going to go back to work tomorrow and I'm going to change something?
Been stuck in a rut with OKRs for quite some time. John Deere's one toolkit.
Yep.
Where basically finance tell you, here's the objective. Your key results cascade to your heart's content and give me an outcome.
Yep.
This helps in a way to frame it, because I would flip those effective metrics the other way around. It allows me to get to a customer touch point or interaction that I can potentially show value.
So this is always my quarterly OKR. And I have the same OKR often for multiple quarters, and I just build an understanding of that with my leadership team. But these will be my quarterly OKRs, and then these will be the KRs underneath it. And so I've just turned this into my OKR model, and it works great. It avoids, because OKRs are, we used to have OKR software, and we said, look, what we should do, instead of selling this OKR software, we should sell t-shirts that say OKRs are hard, and that'll be way better business, and we'll make way more money out of that than actually selling the software. Because OKRs are really hard, especially for product design teams, because you go into this rut of like, okay, we've just got now a checklist of the features we're releasing. Well, that's terrible. That's not a proper OKR. Or you've got these OKRs that are, okay, well, nothing's going to change for 6 months, and so that's kind of pointless. And so what I love about this is, if you've been doing this right and you've got your KRs, you're seeing daily change and you're building up towards something, and so it's something that you can really relate back. And so yeah, all my OKRs are just this now.
How are the purple ones your KRs?
Because I've got a measurement, because again, if I've got a metric around this, that this is a problem I'm solving and I'm able to quantify it. Not all opportunities necessarily are, but I'll give you a concrete example. This is a bad idea because it's going to take a long time. No, I don't want to have to explain everything that we do in our software because that'll take a while. But if we say like customers don't know what goes together, right? That's a harder one to sort of quantify. But this one, this one might be a much easier one. That customers need to furnish an entire room.
Okay.
So if we say how many customers are buying like multiple products for one room, and we're able to quantify that, we're able to say we're solving this problem more than we were before. Great. I love going back and forth through slides. Anybody else? What they might change? Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to use this to get my development team to embed analytics on our software.
Nice.
Because you can't measure it, right?
Yep.
And I just want to get the business leaders to understand that we have the top half, right? We know exactly what we need to do, but we don't know where in the software are the problems. Now, we get a lot of qualitative information from our surveys and our, I do like thousands of hours of lab testing, right? But it's not granular enough, it's not instant, right? It's how often can I get our customers together, right? So, I mean, I know the value of analytics, but this way I can actually, tell them, you're not gonna hit your things if I don't have my data.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is, like, I've worked with lots of teams where it's like, okay, we just need to have some analytics here. Let's install Google Analytics or PostHog or whatever it is, and let's start tracking stuff. And that's really hard then too, because it's like, what are we actually, because we're using something like Mixpanel where you actually have to like capture the events. What events are we capturing? So again, when we come back to this, like go through all the slides, I need to go to this. But when we defined this, now we can actually say, well, now these are the metrics that we want to actually capture, and this is the analytics. So a blanket statement of add analytics into the platform is really hard to action on. But when we say, I want to be able to measure this, and this is why I can't emphasize enough, the most important thing is defining the metrics before you start the building. And then if you start doing that, and coming back to your question earlier, if you're building that in with the engineering team and with your tech team, and they understand that, they get why they're being asked to add all of this other metric stuff instead of just building the feature, and it makes sense to them. And so
It's also a good way to like sell the tech team to the business, right?
yeah,
Because they're just builders, right?
yeah,
You're like, no, actually, they're the ones that are gonna track how successful we are, so.
yeah,
It's really important for them
Yeah.
to actually see that what they're working on actually has an impact.
And that's the thing, is that often, they're just the ones at the bottom of the food chain, right?
Yeah,
The builder.
yeah.
You can say, actually, you're core to this, because without your code, you put this thing in for my events or my actions, I have no idea how to design the product.
yeah. Great. Anybody else want to? Yeah.
For me, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna ask what's preventing us to reach there, because the point you mentioned, what's not working, is more important even than what's working. So yeah, I think this is a key question that will help avoid lots of stuff later on.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. Did I see a hand going up over here?
I think on a much smaller scale, I'm talking about in terms of, let's suppose, freelancing and talking to individual clients. I think what we can what I can use this is in case of proper problem defining.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes the client would come up to you with a situation like, oh, my website is not performing well, or my product is not performing well. I need a complete UI UX overhaul for it. And you're like, no, but what is not working?
Yeah.
Right? And even if we do something, how do we keep a track of what is working and what is not working for it? So things like that. So I think this proves to be like a great foundation base on doing the discovery, maybe even to figure out what the problem solutions are, what's the opportunity, and how do we figure around the whole solution.
Yeah.
So I think this helps you a lot.
What I will say about this is when you actually start putting this into a Miro board, at first people, again, when I explain this to people and I give a nice little like clean presentation, everyone's like, oh, this is great. And then when they actually get into a Miro board and they start doing it, it gets kind of hard. And then people stop doing it. And then I'm like, why isn't this working? And so what I found is that this is a group activity. This is not an individual thing. You don't just set one person off and say, build your opportunity solution tree. This is a group activity. And again, whether it's the trio, whether it's multiple product managers, whether it's you with your team, whether it's you with your client, build this as a group activity, and it's really powerful, and it also you don't get as stuck as quickly.
I'd really love to see one of the Miro maps you have.
Maybe I'll see if I can find one here. I gotta.
Show us the one you did for your wife.
Might as well just take this ring off.
It's not the lawyers.
I honestly don't think I've got a good one that I've got accessible at the moment. Because my current teams do these in small isolations by themselves, and they have their small trees rather than big ones. Let's see, I might have Sterling here.
It was a great tool at Omnipresent because it also, like, sometimes, you're new to a company, you're new to a space, and your designers, your product people, they just want to get out of the building, metaphorically speaking, and do research. But it's like, what are you researching? Why are you researching it? Let's all align, again, with the trio, bring tech involved nice and early, and create our trees, even if it's a hypothesis, even if we don't have the data, just so we're very clear on what are we doing discovery research on, service design on, what are we not, and not just go out there and take forever to kind of come back, and really align to those business objectives. And as you were saying, the OKRs was something that was done, probably the best company I've seen it done at. Unfortunately, one of the co-founders wasn't a huge fan for some reason, but at least in product, it was done from a individual team and department level. I haven't seen OKRs out here done really systematically. I don't know if anyone's using them, but they are quite effective. Even if you introduce it as a personal thing and say, I'm going to do objectives and key results for myself for the quarter, and Chris is a master at that, so he's a great guy if you need some coaching on OKRs. Shameless plug.
I also realize I have no plug slide at all. I'm so bad at that.
It's okay. I've tagged you enough on LinkedIn, and Peter has. If anyone needs to find Chris, you can.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not.
It's not copyright or anything. What you're going to show us?
Yeah, I was
Just a
research
big
quickly.
tree.
No, I can't find it. I'm afraid, folks, because
that's
I'm
all
not logged into the right things here. Yeah, I tell you what. I will try to find one, and I'll redact anything that's important, and I'll post it. But yeah, they can get pretty gnarly, and it's fun. Yeah, great.
By the way, I think Emil template for the Teresa model, so you just go on Emil, search for the solution tree, and you get the template already
Right.
modeled. So.
Nice.
Yeah, there is some good stuff out there, because I think that was a big piece of feedback that she had in the early days was, where's a practical example for this? Because she would use Netflix as an example because it was an easy one to talk about,
Yeah.
and it was easy to talk about the interview process and going back to sort of step 0 and all of that. That worked really well. But in terms of an actual tree, people wanted to see this, and yeah, so there is some good ones out there if you do some Googling.
But have a look at the book again. It's Continuous Discovery, Teresa Torres. You've got a
Continuous
lot
discovery
more
habits, yeah.
Continuous Discovery Habits.
Yeah.
I think it's on Audible as well as on
It is.
hard copy, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. I would say, just before we break up, so I am just Chris Nicol at, here, I'll put my name back up so you can, maybe once, no, I'm on the wrong thing. So yeah, I'm just Chris Nicol on LinkedIn. I don't really use Twitter much anymore. So Chris Nicol on LinkedIn, feel free to add me. I do coaching for product leaders, founders, you know, so if you're looking for any coaching or anything else, feel free to reach out and we can chat and see if I'm the right fit for you. Yeah, and thanks for having me. Welcome back.